Atale Originals presents
Ulrich woke to the smell of heavy smoke. It couldn't have been more than 6 o'clock in the evening. Gray rays of the evening sun pierced through holes into his home.
Alfhild!
He called out, coughing amidst the tear-inducing smoke. There was no answer. He called out again, closing his eyes as he felt his way around in the dark for Alfhild's sleeping body. She wasn't there. Instead, he touched a viscous liquid. The contact with the liquid made him fully awake instantly. He knew what blood felt like when he touched it.
Alfhild! Hedda!
His voice bellowed with a growing alarm. At that moment, he noticed the smoke wasn't coming from the fireplace. Something was burning. Instinctively, he grabbed his axe and dashed outside. It was evening, a damp and cold evening. Its light was barely enough to let him see past his surrounding.
Alfhild!
He screamed again, despair seeping into his voice. He looked about, hoping for a reply, when a man, armed with a shield and sword, charged towards him. The newcomer swung his sword at him sideways. Ulrich dodged. He dodged another vertical swing and, as expected, the newcomer swung left. Ulrich dodged, grabbed his arm just as he raised it, and hit him twice for the tip of the handle of his axe. The newcomer had barely recovered when he brought down his axe on him twice, first on his neck, then on his temple, splitting his head. Another charged at him. This new assaulter did not live as long as the first. Ulrich flung his axe at him. His assaulter blocked the axe. But the axe was a distraction. Ulrich charged at him with a dead man's shield, knocked him down, and bashed his throat in with the shield. He screamed those two names again and ran with no particular direction in mind. He was about to turn a corner when he tripped on a corpse. His face grew white at the sight of the corpse's mangled, yet familiar face. It was his wife's. He crawled over to her, muttering inaudibly, when a piercing cry from another familiar voice was heard. He swung his face in the direction of the scream, and when he swung it back, the body was neither a corpse or his wife's. It was a man's. Capitalizing on his surprise, the man grabbed him and, with the aid of newcomers, subdued him. Ulrich struggled in futility. A man appeared slowly with a bloodied and battered girl, bringing Ulrich's resistance to an instant stop.
She has your eyes, Ulrich.
The man observed, his face cold and detached.
Please.
Ulrich muttered.
Please!
He screamed again as the man brought his hand down on the barely conscious girl, knocking her to her knees. Ulrich watched with growing horror as the man gripped his daughter's chin tightly to hold it in place and dug his large index finger and thumb into her eyes. Father and daughter screamed together, Hedda howling in agony while Ulrich screamed in terror. His scream woke him up. He jumped up, panting and sweating from the nightmare. To his relief, he heard the sound of normal day-to-day activities. Hedda was training with Eric while Alfhild washed in a little stream that made its way from the mountains inland out to the greater sea. She saw her husband and smiled weakly.
"How are you sweating on such a cold afternoon?"
she asked. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he took a position beside her and took a few clothes from the pile she was washing.
Let me help you.
Alfhild watched as her husband washed in silence, his face looking absent-minded.
"What's wrong?"
I saw him again.
He answered, with a tone mixed with sadness and fright.
He came to me in my dreams. This time he killed.
"It's only a dream,"
she said reassuringly.
No, it is not.
He flared, then regaining his composure, continued more softly.
Even if it was, I still have to tell her. She's a woman now. I can't hide my past and its consequences from her anymore.
Telling her would change a lot of things.
She said after a short period of silence.
Informed change is better than blissful ignorance.
He mused. Alfhild was quiet. She hated moments like these. Her husband was in obvious pain, and she could do nothing about it. Ulrich had grown increasingly fraught recently. Sometimes he'd leave the house and she'd find him with his axe at the shoreline, anticipating the arrival of the Jomsvikings. Many times he would shut her off and brood in isolation. Then at night, wake her up to ask for forgiveness for his past, as if she had the power to cure what ailed him. With Hedda maturing, he had to tell her the truth, and what her reaction would be caused him much consternation. The two watched their child as she fought with Eric. Hedda had grown incredibly big in the last few years. At age 15, she'd grown as tall as Eric, who was 2 years her senior, though Eric couldn't by any means be referred to as a huge boy.
She has your ferocity,
Alfhild observed as her daughter knocked Eric to his knees.
She's getting stronger.
Not strong enough.
Ulrich replied. He rose and went towards the direction of the training teenagers. He reached just as Hedda knocked down Eric again. The smile on Hedda's face withered at the sight of her father with a stick.
"Father, you're awake,"
she said, trying to hide her disappointment.
What are you doing?
Their father asked.
"Training with Eric?
Why didn't you wake me up to train with you?
You seemed tired. I didn't want to disturb..."
That is a lie. You didn't wake me up because you wanted to train with Eric because you can beat him easily. Am I wrong?
Hedda looked guiltily at the ground. Her father was correct. She wasn't afraid of the rigorous training from her father. In all honesty, she preferred it. But he had grown too serious recently. He no longer let her have any little wins. Instead, any mistake was met with a sharp reproach. Any weak point was punished till it was strengthened.
Do you think you'll only get to fight men as weak as Eric?
He continued. When Eric grimaced in embarrassment, Ulrich realized how rude he'd been.
Finish your training with Eric.
He spoke in a much softer tone now.
I will analyze your strengths and weaknesses.
Hedda's face lit up at the thought of being praised for something instead of biting and relentless criticism. Last time, his criticism almost made her cry. Eric was a good fighter. His father, Björn Ragnarsson, would have it no other way, pushing him to the limits every day. The training did more harm than good. Eric despised training, fighting, and was starting to despise the man who trained him. His father, though he felt the same way about violence, trained him still because it was better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. Hedda pounced gleefully on Eric, striking his shield with a barrage of axe assaults. Eric winced at the attacks. He tried to strike back, but Hedda kept him constantly on the defense. Her attacks, coming one after the other, both were too fast and fierce, leaving him no time to think. She was literally pushing him around the arena. Eric dodged as she brought down her axe on him and finally landed a strike, but it was a ruse. The blow wasn't as fierce as the others, a sign that she hadn't put all her power in that attack. Before he realized, she'd already dodged his vertical swipe and struck his mouth with a wooden axe.
Be gentle with your friend.
Ulrich chipped in, trying to hide his admiration. The blow infuriated Eric, and he charged without thinking, just like Hedda had hoped. She dodged his angry strike easily, shifting to the left, and kicked the charging boy in the stomach. The kick further angered Eric, and he charged once more, this time almost shouting. Hedda blocked his blow and stomped him back, kicking both his shield and sword down, then went and placed her axe at the throat of the grounded Eric. She'd learned that tactics fighting with Ulrich. Whenever she lost her temper, she lost more rounds. An angry opponent was a thoughtless opponent, and a thoughtless opponent was all but defeated. She practiced the art of infuriating her sparring opponent with her father. Though despite her best efforts, she'd never succeeded in making him angry or lose control. With her opponents the same age, on the other hand, it was too easy. Vocally taunting them made it even easier. Sigurd, one of her age mates, had waited for her on her way home after she'd taunted severely in a friendly sparring, and ended by humiliating him with several defeats. That was the day she knew fighting with swords was much more different from hand-to-hand combat. Sigurd almost blinded her right eye and would have punched her to death had it not been for Eric's intervention. Eric had seen Sigurd glancing menacingly at her. When he stormed off towards the direction Hedda took when she went home, he figured out his plan. Hedda had already left before he could warn her. He sped off after her and arrived to see Sigurd on top of her, raining down blow after blow. Sigurd was bigger, but was evenly matched with Eric. Fighting both Eric and Hedda was an entirely different matter. After an intense scuffle with a lot of scratching and biting, mostly from an infuriated Hedda, he ran, but not before Hedda had bitten off his finger. Eric got up for another round, still panting. They both charged at each other. Seemingly evenly matched, Eric's attacks were more thoughtful and controlled this time around. It was another of Hedda's practice, testing her raw strength without any attempts at taunting her opponent lest she grew overly dependent on one strategy. They both went at it, Hedda's ferocity increasing with each strike, struggling to overpower him with sheer force. Eric struck her down with his shield and relented for a moment to savor his victory. Hedda capitalized on the opportunity and kicked him in the groin. Regaining her footing, they charged at each other again. Hedda gained the upper hand this time, striking his foot and upsetting his balance before kicking him down.
One more time!
Eric shouted, picking his sword and shield. After infuriating him again, Hedda let him attack this time, giving him the false idea that he was controlling the fight. Within a few minutes, he was panting and thoroughly exhausted. Taking him down came effortlessly. After a few more rounds, which ended in Eric either submitting or on the floor, she turned to face her father's judgment.
You've gotten strong. Really strong for your age. I see that you're now fighting with someone your size.
Ulrich announced, and Hedda beamed with pride.
You rely too much on brute force. It isn't always good. You ignore your speed, Hedda. I wish I had your speed. It is an enormous advantage. In battle, there will always be someone bigger than you.
Not if I grow as big as you.
She chipped in.
It took me 40 years to find a woman my size, and I'm a man, Hedda. If you grow as big as me, abandon all hopes of romance.
Hedda burst into laughter, together with her father. Eric was laughing too. Ulrich calmed down a bit and invited the two teenagers in for supper. At first, Hedda was talkative at the prospect of enjoying her father's company once more. She chirped on and on about anything and everything, but by evening she grew withdrawn. Even the story of his encounter with the sea serpent, her favorite, could not entice her anymore. Her father sighed, knowing where her intentions now lay. She was not a child anymore, and he could not stop her from going up. He excused himself on the account of lethargy that comes with age, and Hedda brightened immediately. She kissed him on the cheek and dashed off with Eric. The evening's approaching cold woke Hedda from her sleep. The fire had burned out, and only a little glow remained that gave off a faint red light. The knot with the fish remained at the edge of the embers. The only thing left was the moment they just shared. All their clothes were scattered, and she carefully collected her share so she would not wake Eric. She placed his clothes over him like a blanket so that he would keep warm. Hedda knew that her mother was now awake, waiting for Hedda, as she used to if Hedda did not come home. Hedda opened the large gate to the nave and crept in carefully. It was completely dark, and Hedda could not even see her own hand as she walked through the hall. A branch was broken in two when she stepped on it on the way to her bed, having not seen it through the dark. Ulrich half woke to the sound and turned in his sleep. He began to mumble something incomprehensible. Hedda continued to sneak towards the bed. The mumble had turned into something more understandable. he suddenly cried out in his sleep. Hedda jumped at the crescendo.
Don't be scared. He's only having a bad dream.
Alfhild spoke in the dark.
I can see that. Why are you awake?
She whispered back as she crept back to the side of her bed.
Hard to sleep with all the screaming and grunting.
Hedda muffled a laugh, and her mother sniggered too. Mother and daughter lay wide awake in the darkness.
Father seems to be a bit sad these days.
Hedda observed, unsure whether her mother was still awake.
Yes.
Alfhild murmured back, just as Hedda had shut her eyes, thinking she was now asleep.
It's the past. It can be a terrible thing.
Hedda kept quiet, not understanding in the least what Alfhild was saying.
Hedda, your father doesn't want to be forgiven. He already got that several times. What he wants is to be judged by someone.
For only $9.99 a month, you'll get full access when signing up at Atale.app, iOS app available in App Store. So click and sign up now. Atale.app. Let the adventure surround you.